This comment is exactly why I don't think class consciousness is going to stick in America. I'm assuming that you're talking about the $1 billion that the Biden administration has spent since 2021 on DEI initiatives through the Department of Education. But that's 3 years worth of spending that's going to benefit people who actually live in this country and contribute to the tax base, when Biden also pledged $95 billion to Israel and Ukraine this year. Our defense budget overall was reauthorized at $885 billion this year. None of that money is going to help American citizens. It's all going to enrich already wealthy defense contractors, but you have nothing to say about it because you'd rather be more concerned about what black and brown people are getting that you don't feel they deserve, even though they pay taxes for it. A lot of people think that racism and sexism are just a distraction in the class consciousness discussion, and that they hold us back from having a real debate about us versus them when it comes to the people versus the billionaires, and I agree. But it's only a distraction because people would rather focus on the $1 billion that black people receive from the Biden administration for workplace training, rather than the $886 billion that we give to already rich defense contractors. And it's only a distraction because you think having a diversity quota for women and minorities at your job holds you back more than the fact that the CEO makes 300 times what you do off of your labor. I'm just saying, think about how it benefits the ruling class for us to be distracted while they're spending billions and billions of dollars on private prisons and billions of dollars on private defense contractors, and we're distracted over who's receiving a few $1 billion to help feed their children, to pay their bills between jobs. In reality, we should be centering the most marginalized people in our communities, because when we raise the water for them, then we'll finally raise boats for everyone. I've been thinking a lot lately about how the beginning of the downfall of the American middle class was basically the start of the civil rights movement, or at least when the civil rights movement was officially codified into law. And it's because once the government was no longer able to discriminate on paper by race, social programs evaporated. White middle class and lower middle class people stopped supporting social programs once people of color were allowed to buy in, and those social programs were eradicated over the course of 2 generations. And now here we are watching white people reckon with what it's like to have no upward mobility in this country, because before then, all you really had to do if you were white was have a little bit of ingenuity and a little bit of get-to-itness, and you'd be fine. But now it's not that way anymore, because people at their racism dismantle social programs. They said if black people are gonna get them, then nobody should. And now here we are on the other side of that. And that's what people mean when they say make America great again. Obviously they want racism back, but they want racism back for that specific reason, so that they can get benefits that you can't. I wanted to respond in another video assuming that you're making a good faith argument and just say, we're always gonna have to pay taxes as long as we have a government, because we're always gonna need things like roads, infrastructure, etc. But we've done studies back when we used to spend more money on education as a nation, and they show that for every dollar a state spends on a student, that state can expect to earn $3 to $4 back over the course of that student's lifetime from their earning potential, their income tax, their sales tax, etc. So assuming we're always gonna have to pay taxes, it's just good fiscal policy to put that money back in the pockets of the middle class who are going to spend it and give it back to the economy. Every year we spend increasing amounts on military and prison funding, and those industries are so privatized that public money is starting to be pooled into the hands of a very small group of people who are all becoming mega billionaires. So I see how not paying taxes at all sounds enticing because our funds have been so mismanaged, but I really feel like if we were allocating things correctly and to the benefit of society, you'd feel different. One of the most important things we can do right now as individuals is to really learn the history of America and how this country got to be the way it is. And especially with the Department of Education under attack by the Trump administration and red states calling for book bans, it's more important than ever to support your local libraries and let them know that you want these resources to stay in your community. That's why I've been going to the library at least once a week since the election, and I wanted to come here and share some books so that maybe we can inspire each other with new reads. A bunch of you recommended that I read the book The Sum of Us by Rachel McGee, so I actually went and picked that up about 2 days ago. So I'm only 100 pages into it so far, but I'm really enjoying it. This book breaks down how white people across the country destroyed everything from public pools to social programs just to prevent black and brown people from cashing in on them. Next, I want to recommend The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, which breaks down how housing segregation through the 20th century really set in motion the wealth gap that we still see today between white and black households. And he makes the argument for why the government needs to be even more aggressive about undoing the effects of de jure segregation. I'm going to leave it there, but let me know if you have any other recommendations that we can share with each other so that we can keep this ball rolling into 2025. A lot of people think that the American middle class started to disappear under Ronald Reagan, and I can understand why you would think that, since that's when the majority of white Americans started to be affected by policies. But Reagan's own 1984 campaign manager admitted that they were following a strategy that had started decades before in the 60s. Lee Atwater admitted that in the 1960s it became politically unpopular to use words like the N-word in public, so people started switching over to things like states' rights and forced busing. The focus there was how government spending was helping to boost up black people at the expense of white taxpayers. And Atwater admitted that that was the same strategy he and Reagan were using when they introduced concepts like the welfare queen and responsible government spending to white Americans nationwide. So even if the white middle class was fine until Reagan, they were only convinced to vote against their own interests due to racism. They would rather go without than see black people go with. And I think that that says a lot about American history. There are still social programs that white people won't support because they don't want black and brown people to have access to them, like free higher education, which we had through the 1960s, and right after civil rights, that all went away. Look how much support varies between races and also between age groups, and think about who would have benefited the most during the 1960s from free college education before black and brown people were allowed to get it, and now look at who wants to close the door behind them to make sure nobody else can get it. So black and brown people might receive more per capita in benefits dollars today, but they've also been excluded from benefits that your parents and grandparents got that nobody else had access to. And my point is that all middle-class Americans could get more back from their tax dollars if we stop focusing on what black and brown people are getting that you don't think they deserve, and instead start focusing on what we're giving to billionaires for space contracts and defense contracts and private prisons.